Welcome to the Rebranding Christianity podcast, a space where we can talk honestly about how and in what ways contemporary Christianity has moved away from the radical love that Jesus told us to be known for, and a space where we, as Jesus followers, can explore ways of doing better. It may sound easy to say, well, just be more loving. As true as that statement is, what does that actually look like in our culture today? And how can we, as a community or as churches, love in such a way that holds true to the teachings of Jesus, fulfills our brand promise of love, and builds a type of reputation that the New Testament writers said was important? Last episode, we talked about how Jesus came to break down the barrier between us and God, as well as the barriers between us and each other. So when churches defy our natural dividers of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic barriers, etc., it actually draws attention to something supernatural going on within the context of Jesus followers. Diversity is our issue. Today, we're going to talk about a couple more positive steps that communities of faith can work toward. I'm glad you're part of the conversation. I'm Greg Holmes.
And I'm Cindy Park. Greg and I are continuing our conversation with Jeff Jones and Mike Hogan, authors of the book Rebranding Christianity. The first several episodes were kind of heavy. We were looking honestly at the state of Christianity in America, and it wasn't encouraging. But last episode, we started looking towards solutions that churches or communities of faith could pursue together. We want to build on that today. We're going to talk about a couple of behaviors that have been important in every healthy season of the church throughout church history.
Jeff and Mike, welcome back.
Thank you.
Jeff, I want to start with you. So in your book, Rebranding Christianity, you talk about the importance of churches adopting a value of doing good. And honestly, just speaking honestly to you, it sounds a little obvious that churches should be doing good. But you kind of make the case that maybe it is obvious, but it hasn't been obvious. I mean, so talk to us a little bit about when you say that doing good is a value, why does it even need to be said?
Yeah, well, Jesus said it, so he felt like it needed to.
Yeah,
Paul said it, do good to all men. Jesus said, let your light shine in such a way that people see your good works, doing good, your good deeds, and glorify our Father in heaven. So it's good works that people can see, and the result is glorify God in heaven. And that's should be a preoccupation for us, right? In order to demonstrate the reality of the gospel and to cause people to turn to God. And yeah, you would think, well, of course, churches doing good, that's what you do. But naturally, the Jesus brand of living a selfless life is not natural.
Yeah.
And therefore, a group of people, a group of Christians called church, living a selfless life, committed to doing good for other people at sacrifice to me, is just not natural. It sounds good, but churches will almost always, just the default, without a lot of intervention and focus and the work of the Holy Spirit, will be internally focused. And the energy of the church will be internal, not external, out and doing good to all men and doing good deeds in a way that people can see outside of the community of faith. So I think it's just human nature. And most churches are built for the benefit of church people, not for the benefit of the community who are not church people. And to a lot of people, that makes sense. Well, yeah, they pay the bills or whatever. Right? They're the ones who...
And, there might be a few hundred people part of that church, and they have needs too, and they've got, there's a lot to keep us occupied.
Yeah. So, but a Jesus following life is really a life of saying, it's not about me. We're here to help each other, give away our lives for the sake of other people, and to funnel our good works and all our stuff, outside the church, not inside the church. But that just takes, I lead a church, it just takes constant effort to keep the focus that direction.
So in thinking about this idea of focusing on the outside and like drawing people in that way, in the book you tell a story about a woman who wanted to serve the community with our church, but didn't want anything to do with Jesus. Can you share that story and help us understand why we don't always have to lead with being overtly Christian in order to win people to Jesus?
Yeah, I love her story because she was a person in the community, not a Christian, a neighbor of a friend of mine who leads a small group. And, a lot of people in our culture see what's going wrong and they would love to think they could do something about it, that they could make a difference. But it's just hard to know what to do. And so she saw how my friend, who was a small group leader in her church, it was a group that was very engaged in doing local good in the community in all kinds of ways. And she saw that happening. And so she met with him and just said, hey, look, I'm going to ask something, and I fully expect you to say no. And he's like, well, what? He said, well, she said, I really want to make a difference in our community. It's a huge value to me, but I've had a hard time knowing how to do it. There's nobody that makes that easy. But it seems like your church does. Like you guys make it really easy to make an appreciable, measurable, significant difference in our community. And I want to be part of that. However, I don't want to become part of your church. So what I'm asking is, hey, could I use you kind of like a vendor? Can I use you to get what I want, which is to be involved in making a difference in the community, but just know I will never come to your church service. Mm-hmm. I don't want to become a Christian. I don't want anybody talking to me about that. I'm just not interested in your faith, but I am interested in what you're actually doing. Mm-hmm. I really want to make, and nobody makes it easier than you. And so she said, I'm fully fine to not, just for you to say, sorry, it's only for the members or whatever. And of course he said, well, no, man, just come do this with us, right? And she did. And you can imagine what happened, right? She was serving with our small group. I was in that group as a member. And we knew, hey, we're going to be really careful about our conversations and all of that kind of stuff. We're not going to invite her to church. But over time, things happen, right? And, there came a time where she's like, hey, would your group pray for us? Something was going on with her son. And and then after a while, I started seeing her showing up at church services, and I didn't make a big deal about it, but just saw it. And then eventually, months later, we were doing a spontaneous baptism service, and which people can get up and go get clothes that are free and then go get baptized. And I was on the platform. She caught my attention. She waved her hand and did a thumbs up that she was about to get baptized and cross the line of faith. Wow. And then she did. Her husband baptized her, who had just a couple weeks before become a Christian. So it just... But I think that's an illustration of, we think the front door of church is church service, and for some people it is, but I think increasingly in our world, people aren't thinking, if they're not church, they're not thinking, where am I going to go to church this weekend? Like nobody, if you're not church, that's the last thing you're thinking about. Yeah. But I think there are a lot of people thinking about, man, I would love to make a difference. I would love to be involved in something real, something significant, not just token. And so therefore the invitation of, hey, come change the world with us is a much more credible invitation for a lot of people in a post-Christian culture than, hey, come to church with me.
Yeah. Yeah, Mike, I'd be interested for you to sort of piggyback on that and talk about it, because when a church or community of faith takes on the brand that we do good in the community, and there's something interesting that happened at Chase Oaks Church where you serve. Those 3 values: come as you are, be transformed, make a difference. And I know that for a long time, we used to talk about those values as like assuming that they happen sequentially, that there was that what people are going to be attracted to with Chase Oaks is that it's an open and welcoming environment. They're going to experience acceptance and the love of Jesus. They're going to be transformed and then released to make a difference in the world, And you and I have talked before, like when we actually talk to people and kind of that maybe that's not always people's story, And so talk to me a little bit about what happens when a church or community really lives into that brand.
Yeah, sure. So for me, it's first I'd say all 3 are important, right? All 3 of those things are expressions of our values and who we are and of the Christianity brand. Different ones might be emphasized at different times. I think it was probably 20 years ago we put that together. And as I think back on it, 20 years ago, I think it actually represented how most people felt about church at the time, right? You'd talk to a lot of people outside the church and you'd hear something like, I really need to be in church, but, I'm not ready yet because I got to get my life together. I got to quit drinking. I got to, whatever it is that I have to do. And so I think it, it was appropriate that we were that way. And a lot of it did happen that way. And you tend to see people show up for the first time, like maybe at a Sunday service with somebody or something. And so that's why we did that. But I think within a few years, to your point, what we found was that we were seeing as many new people coming in through these make a difference kind of things. So you might see people the first time at something we were out fixing houses or feeding people or whatever. And just like the story Jeff told, the Sunday service maybe didn't come until, much later. And so I think what it told us was, it told us that the value that we were articulating, this making a difference, was really, really appealing, even to people who didn't have a traditional Christian frame of reference. Or said another way, people actually didn't have a felt need to go to church, but they had a felt need to be doing something that was making a difference, which is, I think, really an important learning for us, and it really kind of illustrates the cultural shift that happened over maybe a 20-year period. I do think this is broadly true, by the way, in our society today. Most people, I think, do feel a need to make a difference. It could be feeding the poor, it could be fighting climate change or whatever, but people want to, but they don't necessarily associate that with Christians or churches, right? Which is, of course, a tragedy. And I think it really illustrates just how far the brand has fallen. I want to do something good. What does that have to do with church? Right.
Yeah.
So I think the other point I would make here is just that making a difference has always been a part of the brand, right? It wasn't like we did some survey and found out this was important to people. So as you said, we weren't talking about it much. We never changed the brand. We were just living out the brand in an authentic way as a church. And I think at different points in time, different pieces of that happened to be the ones that rose to the top and were most appealing to people.
You go back 2,000 years too, right? With Jesus, his invitation, like to the fishermen, was follow me, I'll make you fishers of men, right? He didn't say follow me and we'll do a Bible study and you'll get to know God better, even though all that would happen. Right. But the invitation was a life of mission focused on people outside of ourselves. And in that context, all kinds of things are going to happen in your life. But essentially, if he was coming today, he'd say, Greg, follow me, let's change the world together. Yeah. I mean, that is his invitation. That's what this movement is about. And his movement is about, and so therefore it's not like you said, Mike, just a tactic. This comes from the top. It comes from our founder. It's what he calls us to.
Yeah. So if we think about a group of people that want to change the world, it's really like the next generation. But while they want to do that, at the same time, they're leaving the church and their faith at alarming rates. How have you seen doing good impact the next generation?
What's hugely important in the next generation, and we know that you don't have to do, people like Mike can do research of different demographics, and in that demographic, you have to do much research to know that hugely important to them, and really it's our legitimacy, and if we want them to hear anything we have to say, it's going to be essentially prove it. They need to see it happen. And I share a story in the book about watching online church with some friends, one of whom she was probably 24 at the time, 25 years old, not a Jesus follower, open to the concept of Jesus, but has always been pretty repulsed by Christianity, her exposure to Christianity, until our family. She's got connected to our family, so she's kind of a little bit encouraged, engaged, and all that. So she and her boyfriend at the time were watching online church. We happened to be out of state. We happened to be there watching online church. It was during the pandemic when church, and it was quite an experience, right? For one, I'm watching myself speak, but which I don't do a whole lot. So we're sitting there watching church together on the couch. She's got the clicker in her hand. And the announcements come on, and whoever started doing the announcements, and so we did what you always do as church people. Whenever there are announcements, you tune out, right? Yeah. I mean, you just So we start talking, and she pushes pause on the TV and says, "Hey, do you guys mind not talking during this part?" And we were kind of chided, and kind of, and again, it got quiet. She actually rewound it to go back to the beginning of the announcements. And then she, we started. So at the end, I just asked her, I said, so honestly, it was a little bit surprising, that you were so keyed in on that part of the service. And she said, oh, it's my favorite part, which hurt a little bit because I spoke that weekend, and, it could have been the sermon, but no, she said, no, it's and she saw that. She's like, no, I like your part too, but it's my favorite part because that's when you talk about as a church, what you're doing in the community that's making a difference. And that's what I want to hear. And she said, it's amazing to me because in this way she said it. She said, my generation, which she's 20 something, my generation values making a difference, but we don't really do much with that. We don't really sacrifice for that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of value tagging is the word she used. So we buy Patagonia because we care about the environment, or we buy Tom's shoes because we care about poor people or whatever. But
you
we're not
post
really
certain things on your social.
but we're not really actually doing a whole lot. And your church is like, you're really actually moving the needle. You're actually doing stuff. And that's just really, it's so motivating to me. And I realized that for her, she just speaks for a generation, that our legitimacy is that. And can people actually see our faith in action in a way that's compelling, which is what Jesus told us to do. So it shouldn't be surprising. But in a post-Christian culture, how are people going to give a flip about anything? We have to say, if we don't put the love of Jesus in a way that people can see it, it's tangible. That's what Jesus said, to do good deeds in a way that people can see.
Yeah.
And so we've got to do that.
That's great. All right. Well, Jeff, I want to ask a question about a different topic. So we've talked about a new type of community that churches can pursue, a community of diversity that breaks down the barriers between us. We've talked about being communities of Jesus followers that do good in a way that can cause people to say, yeah, that's can draw attention to that. The third thing, or another thing that you talk about in your book, is being a community of people that have the widest welcome.
Yeah.
And so I just love for you to define what that means, and how do you see that played out in Jesus' life and in the life of the early church? Like, what does it mean to be a group of people with the widest welcome?
Yeah, so the brand is, as we've been talking about, John 13 as well as John 15, is our thing, the way we roll. This is how people know you're my disciples. If you love the way I loved, right? So how did Jesus love people? How did he love strangers? How did he love And when you look at that, if we're going to love like he loved, well, he had the widest welcome of anybody in his culture. And that's why the Pharisees, the really good religious people, had a very narrow welcome, because you had to, you got to align with truth, and they got to get their life together. And we can't just, if we accept these people, then it's like we're agreeing with them, and it's going to be confusing for them. And they think it's okay to be a sinner and all that stuff, all the religious stuff. But Jesus didn't have any of that. So he was called a friend of sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes and whoever else. And he didn't mind that at all. He's like, yeah, they're my friends, and those people liked him. He liked them. They invited him to their parties because he was a hit, not because he, ruined it, right? And so he was a friend of sinners and a friend of tax collectors, so much so that the religious people called him a glutton and a drunkard, because they assumed, well, if you're going to those parties, which, they were eating and drinking too much for sure at those parties, and probably other things too that were not appropriate. He wasn't participating in that, but they assumed he was, right? Because religious people often assume that acceptance equals agreement. That if I accept you means I agree with you. And that's not the way God accepts any of us. It's not you get your life together completely and then I'll accept you. It's he accepts us by his grace and then leads us to truth. And so the way I talk about it a lot is the way Jesus related was a wide welcome to a narrow path. And he had the widest of welcomes. And in that culture, eating with people was a really big deal. It wasn't just a small thing. It was saying, hey, these are my people, So incredible acceptance that got him in trouble with religious people. But you do see it led to somewhere over time. He did get to truth. It's not like he didn't get there. He did. But it was in relationship, a lot of grace and patience over time. And within acceptance, within grace, you see transformation happen, like Zacchaeus, who's a tax collector. And Jesus said, hey, we're going to hang out tonight. I'm staying at your place. You're going to fix me dinner. And they hung out. Well, the result of that, right after that, next day, Zacchaeus just blurts out, hey, if I've defrauded anybody of anything, which he had, he's a tax collector, I'll pay you back exponentially. I'm going to do it right now. Here we go. And why did he do that? Well, I don't think Jesus told him, hey, I'm not coming to your house until you pay all this back. Well, I know he didn't, right? But it was in the context of grace and acceptance the transformation happened. And so church should be like that, should be the place with the widest welcome that anybody knows they can find acceptance. whether they're a sinner or a tax collector or whatever they are, right? That this is the one place I could go and be loved and be accepted. And in that process, find transformation. But that's what church should be. Of course, we know it's, for a lot of people who are there, it's the last place they could ever go if they felt like they were a notorious sinner or something.
So this might be a loaded question, but as a pastor, as a lead pastor, what are the challenges of leading a welcoming church, or leading a community of believers they're going to grow in how wide their welcome is? That's got to be a challenging task in our culture right now.
Yeah, it is, because we're a polarized culture. We're a cancel culture. We're all or nothing kind of thing, very black and white. And this is subtle and nuanced, the way Jesus related, because we learn in John 1 that Jesus came full of grace and full of truth. He didn't come with half truth and half grace, or 80% truth and 20% grace. He was full of both. So he was full of grace and full of truth. So he cared deeply about both. But the order is important. He always led with grace, and in the context of grace and acceptance, pointed to truth over time, but he actually wasn't that hyper about it. He gave a lot of grace and a lot of rope and a lot of time, just like he does to me, thank God. And I think that's hard for Christians to get. It's the way we want God to relate to us and our sins and our struggles, but we look at the sins and struggles of other people and we get all judgmental and upset about their sin. They sin differently than we do, or they struggle, and every generation kind of has something. In our day, it's a lot of it's like LGBT stuff or gender identity. So we pick on that, which again in church history would be considered just weird that would be the thing. But every generation has it. So I just think there's a tension that you're trying to manage. It's not black and white, and what people want is that kind of clarity that, hey, if you struggle with this, you can't be here, or you got to deal with that first and then come. And Jesus just didn't relate that way. And so it is subtle, it is relational, it is messy. It's a tension to manage, grace and truth. So it's not something you're trying to solve. It's just this tension you're trying to manage in relationships. And helping Christians understand that and get that is just, it's not easy.
Mike, I'd love for you to speak into, let's say you were consulting with a company that wants to be a company known for having a wide welcome, those types of things, but doesn't really want to engage in political fights, which it's hard to imagine how you'd even go about doing that now in our culture right now. But how could brands, I mean, since you come at this from a different perspective, what kind of advice would you give on how to do that?
Sure. So let's talk about how to do it well and how to do it poorly.
Yeah.
So, for the sake of argument, let's pick a couple of examples like, or maybe Bud Light and Patagonia.
Right.
So, by the way, I think we all know who in that example did it well and who did it poorly, so we don't have to go to that. But I would say, at the end of the day, principles-wise, to me, there's really sort of three things that matter here. The first one is authenticity. The second one is authenticity. And can you guess what the third one is? So if I go back to the making a difference question at Chase Oaks, right? Chase Oaks, there wasn't a survey, right, that said, hey, here's what's important to people today, making a difference. Oh, let's call the PR, let's gin up a campaign or something about making a difference so we could talk about it. It was just authentically living out the brand promise. And I think we could all argue that making a difference clearly comes out of the brand value of unconditional love, right? So it's not like in other words, the why is really important, right? Why are you doing this? I think in the same way, if you think about a brand like Patagonia, now they've always been passionate about preserving the environment, right? They've done a great job of expressing it in a positive, caring way, because a lot of people express that same value in a negative and criticism in accusing way. But they've also taken some pretty bold positions that a lot of people may not agree with. But even people who disagree with them can appreciate the genuine care that's behind it, right? And I found that to be true, broadly speaking, right? So on the other hand, think about, Bud Light. I mean, it's a beer, and it doesn't really stand for anything anyway, right? And so
certainly not good beer.
Exactly. So what they did was, a lot of brands did this. They went out looking for something, right? Something edgy or controversial Why? To draw attention to the brand. And so they got involved with an influencer, and in this particular case, that happened to ultimately backfire from them. But there was no, like if you said, what is the fundamental value of this brand that they were going to do, whether it sold more beer or not, that was behind us? And it wasn't. It was just a PR stunt, is all it really was. So in my experience, what I found is that when people know you mean well and you're sincere, they will forgive even really big mistakes, right? So my advice would be, stick with things that are clear expressions of your values that you actually intend to honor over time. If you said, hey, would we be doing this anyway, even if it didn't sell our product, then things will usually work out well.
Yeah.
Wow.
Do you think Bud Light can recover?
I do. I'm actually, to be honest, I'm actually surprised how long this one has lasted. I think it has, you tend to think about, the 24-hour news cycle and how long does this last until something bigger comes along that displaces it. For whatever reason, this one has really stuck. Obviously the company didn't respond very well either, because we've seen bigger mistakes by bigger brands. There was this thing a couple years ago where Apple had done this thing where it came out that they sort of knew that the batteries would wear out early, but they kind of, they owned up to it, and people were like, yeah, that doesn't really sound like Apple anyway, and they made good on it. So I think there's a lot of value in just sort of a mea culpa, an apology, and just trying to do good, trying to be nice.
Yeah. Well, these last two episodes, Jeff, I don't want to speak for you. I guess I will here.
Go for it.
Around the table.
It'll be better.
I think you could make a list of things that churches need to focus on, some of which we haven't talked about in these episodes, preaching and worship and, like things like that. And a lot of churches do those things and do them well. We've been talking about, though, when viewed from the outside, it would be great if it would help the brand considerably if Christian communities were seen as wildly diverse and, in growing and then breaking down those barriers, doing good in the community and being a community that had the widest welcome. Like if churches had that, if we were known for that would move the needle, we would say. Well, the next two episodes, we're going to get a bit more personal. We're going to ask the question, what are some things that I can do? What are some behaviors that I can start incorporating into my life? What are some attitudes that I can change in my life if I want to, within my own sphere of influence, help move the needle as well? And so please come back for our next episode of Rebranding Christianity.